waited till just before the show started, but he's not with us right anymore. I'm going to try to get through this. He has a final message that he wanted to say, so I'm going to try to read it, trying to be strong. If you are reading this, things did not go well for me. I have a few things to say before I go. My body failed before my brain. I am of sound mind as I write this January 1st, 2026. If you wonder about any of my choices for my estate or anything else, please know I'm free of any coercion or inappropriate influence of any sort. I promise.
Next, many of my Christian friends have asked me to find Jesus before I go. I'm not a believer, but I have to admit the risk-reward calculation for doing so looks so attractive. So here I go. You heard his ex-wife read some of this. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I look forward to spending an eternity with him. The part about me not being a believer should be quickly resolved if I wake up in heaven. I won't need any more convincing than that, and I hope I'm still qualified for entry. With your permission, I'd like to explain something about my life. For the first part of my life, I was focused on making myself a worthy husband and parent as a way to find meaning. That worked, but marriages don't always last forever, and mine eventually ended in a highly amicable way. I'm grateful for those years, and the people I came to call my family. Once the marriage unwound, I needed a new focus, a new meaning, and so I donated myself to the world, literally speaking the words out loud in my otherwise silent home. From that point on, I looked for ways I could add the most to people's lives one way or another. That marked the start of my evolution, from Dilbert cartoonist to an author of what I hoped would be useful books. Boy, was he ever. By then, I believed I had amassed enough life lessons that I could start passing them on. I continued making Dilbert comics, of course. As luck would have it, I'm a good writer. My first book in the useful genre was How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. That book turned out to be a huge success, often imitated and influencing a wide variety of people. I still hear every day how much that book changed lives. My plan to be useful was working. Stand by. Next page. I followed up with my book, Win Bigly, that trained an army of citizens how to be more persuasive, which they correctly saw as a minor superpower. I know that book changed lives because I hear it often. You'll probably never know the impact the book had on the world, but I know, and it pleases me while giving me a sense of meaning that is impossible to describe. My next book, Loser Think, tried to teach people how to think better, especially if they were displaying their thinking on social media. That one didn't put much of a dent in the universe, but I tried. Finally, my book, Reframe Your Brain, he came on and promoted that with all of us, taught readers how to program their own thoughts to make their personal and professional lives better. I was surprised and delighted at how much positive impact that book is having. I also started podcasting a live show called Coffee with Scott Adams, dedicated to helping people think about the world and their lives in a more productive way. I didn't plan it this way, but it ended up helping lots of lonely people find a community that made them feel less lonely. Again, that had great meaning for me. I had an amazing life. I gave it everything I had. If you got any benefits from my work, I'm asking you to pay it forward as best you can. That is a legacy I want. Be useful. And please know, I loved you all to the end. Scott Adams. Wow. It's a beautiful message. Gosh, he did so well. He did so well right to the end with his messaging.
So breaking news, the creator of Dilbert, Scott Adams, has passed away from cancer. Now, if you didn't know, recently in the last year or so, Scott Adams had been dealing with cancer, and he had been approved by his insurance company for a specific treatment, but, scheduling and such were taking forever. So he ended up reaching out on Twitter to all of his MAGA people to get him in touch with Trump in order to push this through. So this was like down to the last minute for him, right? Now, as far as I know, Trump reached out and I guess he got the treatment, but it obviously didn't work because now he's gone. And I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, the world's better off without, blah, blah, blah. But I want to kind of take this as a moment to remind people that at the end of the day, we all end up in the same dirt pile that everyone else ends up in. Like, it doesn't matter what you do on this earth, how much money you make, how much you're worth, what your politics are, whatever else. We all do not get off this planet alive, right? Like, we all end up taking a dirt nap eventually. And with Scott Adams, like, this guy was an artist. He created a cartoon that tons of people read. And that's not what he's going to leave this earth being remembered for. Not in my mind. I'm just going to remember him as this hateful MAGA person, right? Like, I am not going to be like, oh, you know, I love Dilbert. It's such a shame. Like, you know, there's lots of creative people in this world that when they leave, I am going to miss them and I am going to remember the great art that they created, whether it's a movie or music or a cartoon or whatever. But this is not what I am going to fondly look at this guy for. And I think that's going to be like the case for a lot of people. And I just think to myself, like, why? What did this end up doing for him in the long run? Like, he just was a hateful person. He still ends up gone. And instead of having people, you know, across North America that read his cartoon, that remember the Sunday funnies, you're not going to have everyone looking back on him fondly. You're going to have a divisive group of left and right, where the right, I guess, will miss and celebrate, but the left is just going to remember him for being MAGA. And I don't know why people think that this is how they want to be. Like, did it put more money in his pocket? Did it extend his life further? No, not really. I don't think, if anything, I think being MAGA kind of screwed over his career as an artist. I don't think he was continuing, like, was he even still making Dilbert and having it appear in newspapers? I honestly don't know. Because all I know about this guy is him in the MAGA stuff. Because his art became a completely separate thing that nobody cared about anymore. When honestly, when you as an artist become more of the story than your actual art, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And like, I don't wish death upon anyone. Like, I'm not a spiteful, awful person. You know, like, I don't think, you know, death is so finite, right? I'd rather people change. I'd rather people become better. I don't want them to be unalived. I want them to grow and mature and become better people. And I would have rather have liked that, you know? If this guy had have gone into remission and, hey, we had a come to Jesus moment or something, I don't know, and became a better person, I would have been more, that would have been the happy ending that I would have wanted. I don't want this for him. But I think it's a really good example of that. If you are a hateful, spiteful person, that is the legacy you leave. Like J.K. Rowling. Hateful, spiteful person. I fucking loved the movies and the books. But now, I can't like them. I can't enjoy them. And when I think of her, I don't think of the books. I think of her hateful spitefulness. And she went from a beloved author to a fucking transphobe. To a horrible, awful person, and that is how she will leave this planet if she doesn't change her ways. She will not be beloved. She won't be. Not by everyone, anyway. And I really think that people just need to look at their lives and say, like, as an artist, how do you want to be remembered when you are gone?
Very important voice to the MAGA movement and conservative movement, even though he wasn't conservative. Scott Adams, you will be missed. He's had an impact on my life. A lot of words of wisdom.
I've been following Scott Adams for a long time. Really, since I was 10, I guess. My grandmother used to send me Dilbert compilation books in my summer camp care packages, and I loved them. I feel like there were the people who read Dilbert as children and identified with it somehow, and like they were the ones that were kind of had a certain amount of born cynicism, you know what I mean? But I've loved Dilbert from the very early days, and I had no idea who Scott Adams was. I remember seeing him once or twice, like in magazine interviews or stuff like that. But you know, he always had his name at the bottom of the book, of course, because he's the author. And anyway, I, for many years thought nothing about Dilbert, and then I got reacquainted with Scott, I don't know, probably in like 2014 or 2015. A friend of mine really liked Scott Adams. I suspect he doesn't I haven't talked to this person in many years now. I suspect with Scott's political endeavors, this friend has probably taken his leave some time ago from Scott. But in any case, I saw Scott on Tim Ferriss, which I used to watch Tim Ferriss, or listen to Tim Ferriss rather, religiously. I loved the Tim Ferriss podcast, and I heard Scott on there, and I thought, God, this guy's actually like kind of a super genius. He's really interesting, and he has a really unique way of framing things because of all the hypnosis stuff and all that. So I started following Scott, and he started this show on Periscope, which no longer even exists. But so I was one of the early Periscope listeners to the Coffee with Scott Adams, which I don't even think it was called that. It's probably just like the Scott Adams Show or something. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But whether or not you liked Scott, agreed with his opinions, he was an extraordinarily influential person, especially in political life these past few years. I mean, even if you just got some enjoyment out of Dilbert, an extremely influential person. And what I guess I really kind of want to share with people, maybe two things and then a final thing. I listened to Scott most heavily during the first Trump administration and slightly before that, and then during the COVID years. I was a daily listener during COVID. And I'll never forget, it was in April sometime, it was around Easter, it was before Easter. He was doing evening shows back in those days, and he did a show where he used hypnosis on the listeners to get them to calm down and to help them to sleep, because everybody was really wigged out in those days. I mean, I'm sure we all remember that, but it was a really tense time. And I've thought back on that so many times and thought, God, that is one of the most humane things I've ever seen somebody do. Because he was clearly not wigged out, right? Like, he was just kind of riding the wave. And I just thought that was so neat that he did that. And I've come back to it several times. But the other thing was the grit and grace with which that guy handled the last however many months of his life. He was going to do medically assisted self-unaliving. I hate that we have to say that instead of just the actual, what we all know what we're talking about here. He was going to do that last summer because he was having so much pain from the tumors in his spine that that was kind of the way he had chosen to go. And then he ended up getting access to a different type of treatment that took away the pain. And so we ended up having him a lot longer. Well, he ended up converting to Christianity at the 11th hour and so on and so forth, which I know made a lot of people very happy. And, but in any case, the way that he continued to grind it out and be useful until the last days of his life, literally, he was on yesterday, sitting with fans and people that he's worked with, talking to them and essentially saying goodbyes, and just completely stoic the entire time. I mean, what an amazing example of a way to live your life, to be useful and to be stoic and to live for other people. And he said one of his last things that he put out, I don't remember if I think he said it out loud, but I think he wrote it as well, was that he wanted to be useful to the American people for as long as he possibly could be. I mean, what an amazing thing to say. And what an amazing thing to accomplish. He probably would have gotten on the morning show today if he hadn't died. And so when I've been running, I've really been thinking about that. Boy, I just wish I could quit right now. I'm really tired. Yeah, who probably else wanted to quit and was really fucking tired? The dude who was dying with cancer and still doing a morning show. But, what else are you going to do? Are you going to, lay down and cry about it? Or are you going to just keep being useful? Because, this is your fate now. Your fate is the graveyard. So you better make the most of your time while you're here. That, I can think of no more useful lesson than that.
So refused to walk them all the way back. So these remarks, of course, triggered a rapid and total collapse of his entire professional career. Hundreds of newspapers immediately dropped the Dilbert comic strip, and his distributor cut all ties with him. One paper left the space blank as a protest against racism. So Scott Adams was only 68 years old.
Scott was a friend to this program because Scott was a friend to truth. Not the fashionable kind. Not the crowd-pleasing, crowd-approved kind. But the kind of truth that actually costs you something. We reached out to him recently. I asked if he would just sit down with me for one last conversation, probably a couple of months ago. He said something that none of us will ever forget. I would love to. But there just isn't any more gas left in this tank. No drama, no self-pity, just honesty. Truth. He didn't save anything. He gave everything that he had. He didn't save it. He didn't ration it. He burned through all of it for all of us. And when the tank finally ran dry, as you just heard, he was still giving, still teaching, and only running on vapors. To me, the remarkable thing about Scott is even his vapors were more than most of us given a lifetime. Let his life challenge you to think clearer, to question everything, question the narratives, to be peaceful, to be kind, to be giving, to understand persuasion so you're not enslaved by it, to laugh, not because things are trivial, but because humor sometimes is the only way to survive reality without surrendering to it. He knew something that I think most people never learn. Clarity is compassion. Truth can be delivered with wit and can reach places anger never will. And courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just keeps showing up day after day until there's nothing left to give. Today, celebrate. Mourn, but celebrate. A man whose life was spent emptying itself out over and over every day for others. Scott Adams finished his race. He didn't quit early. He didn't coast at the end. He crossed the line on fumes, and for that, and for the light he left behind, for the questions he taught all of us to ask, for the honesty he modeled when it mattered most. Scott, thank you. Thank you. You carried more than your share. And my friend, we will indeed see you again.
So I just saw that Scott Adams, the author, creator of Dilbert, passed away on Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. It's pretty sad. But I guess I wanted to just highlight and say that in his final penmanship that he wrote a letter, or whatever you want to call it, an email to his family, friends, etc., that he accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. And he basically kind of put it as like, well, the odds, I would much rather believe in something than kind of not believe in it, and it seems like my odds are better by believing in it. Kind of summary of what he had to say. I kind of wish that he would have made that decision longer ago, but realistically, as long as he truly believes that's what matters, is, nothing else matters in this world, is whether or not you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And hopefully he did.
So if you haven't heard, the creator of Dilbert, Scott Adams, died of Steve Jobs disease today. If you don't know what Steve Jobs disease is, it's basically a person who is rich, who thinks they're smarter than medical doctors, who basically allows some sort of illness progress for too long because they can find alternative medicine, some witchcraft healing stuff. And once it progresses to a long enough state, they eventually succumb to it and die because it's gone too far, and now regular medical treatments cannot help them anymore. Now, what I always find fascinating about people who die of Steve Jobs disease is that this is something that only happens to wealthy people, because of the fact that poor people can't get Steve Jobs disease, because at the end of the day, if they die because they can't get medical treatments, because of the fact that the healthcare industry in the United States sucks. It's not because they want to succumb to these sort of illnesses. And you would think that someone who's rich has the ability to get medical attention early enough to find, catch, and detect these things. But sometimes people just think they're smarter than everyone else, and they don't. They just think the medical institutions are bad and evil for some strange reason, even though they're rich and they should be able to overcome this. But again, no sadness on my part. Scott Adams was a bad person. And he was a bad, racist guy, and he died of Steve Jobs disease. Those are my thoughts. Bye.
If you can't find anything nice to say about someone when they die, the best course of action is to just sit it out. People magazine couldn't do that. Scott Adams, disgraced Dilbert creator, dies at 68. Disgraced. People is a disgrace for that. They have no shred of dignity. They have no shred of humanity, of empathy. And then the New York Times. Breaking news. Scott Adams, whose comic strip Dilbert was a sensation until he made racist comments on his podcast, has died at 68. Really? They can't just say something nice and move on. They can't just leave it alone. Just totally ridiculous. You cannot trust these people. They never tell the truth. And certainly with the death of Scott Adams, they did exactly what they do best, and they spin it to fit their narrative. The man is dead after battling cancer, but they have to do it for the clicks. I can't even say I hope they do better next time. I know they won't.
I'm sure that most of you have seen by now that Dilbert creator Scott Adams passed away today. Most of you are probably more familiar with Scott Adams' work as a huge asshole. There's one aspect of his death that actually does make me really sad and does break my heart, and that's how preventable it was. Up until it was too late, Scott Adams refused any legitimate medical treatment for his cancer, choosing instead to treat it with ivermectin. And this was mostly because his colleagues, contemporaries made fun of him for getting the COVID vaccine. And honestly, I can't think of anything sadder than dying just to impress Ben Garrison.
Not to be a bog or anything, but sometimes you really gotta have a simultaneous sip with people, and life can be good. Even in the bad times, life can be good. That's what I learned from Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert. He ran a race to the very end. And was good to the last drop. Started listening to him around 2016. Wow. And he talked about looking at life in a different perspective, which is something you gotta do. It's something I would do a lot without knowing, without really thinking about it. And he took it to the next level. Beyond any oatmeal.
Oh man, Dilbert dead! I like Scott Adams, but everyone turned on him when he said white people should stay away from black people. What did he mean by that? Because the workplace be toxic, and he got that right.
I think we need to take up Scott's last words. We need to take up his admonition to us to go out and provide value to the world. Let's take up that skepticism he had, questioning everything that everyone says. And I can't wait to see, nobody can fill his shoes. Nobody can fill his shoes, but I can't wait to see the people who will be on fire to go out there and tell truth.
Scott Adams, once a beloved cartoonist, saw his career go up in smoke after publicly advising white people to get the hell away from black people, as well as other racist remarks. As a result, newspapers and distributors swiftly dropped Adams and his Dilbert comic. Then in May of 2025, he was diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer. In October, when reflecting on his downfall, he said on his podcast, Because I was supporting Trump, I eventually threw away my entire career. I sacrificed everything. I may have sacrificed my health, and I did that because I believed it was worth it. Supporting Trump really just seems to kickstart a ticking clock on something bad happening to his own supporters, doesn't it? Scott spent his final months defending policies that cut cancer funding and promoted untrustworthy treatments like ivermectin. These cuts and delays impacted his own care. In November, he begged President Trump on Twitter for help to secure an experimental treatment from a major pharmaceutical company. But of course, that experimental treatment is way different than the COVID vaccine he was severely against. On Twitter, JD Vance called him a true American original and one of the good ones. And if I'm going to be truthful, I'd call him one of the best ones at supporting policies that hurt others and ultimately, even themselves. R.I.P. Scott Adams. And I mean the P part of that, exactly how Melania Trump pronounces it. May you and Charlie Kirk now enjoy the greatest conversations in heaven together. Amen. Because they're definitely in heaven together, right, Fafo? Don't be mad at me, conservatives. He's the one that said it.